Hey guys, so even in the first place, I was debating whether or not I wanted to make this presentation, the presentation that I was going to speak on, how to get better at testing, because in reality, the truth is that hard work triumphs over all. Hard work trumps all, right? The purpose of this presentation is to help you understand what makes a hard test and what makes an easy test. And it also kind of serves as a way for students to help understand the complexity of like testing and the testing system, right? Some people might use this information negatively. They'll go on and say, oh, the schooling system is rigged, so I wasn't going to pass anyways. Whereas 5% of you, I would say, will actually take this information, make peace with it, and they're going to use this advantage in a strategic way that can help benefit yourself. But this isn't for anyone and everyone, because here's the thing. You still need to be an A plus student in order to get an A plus. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, I feel like that's a video for another topic or a presentation for another time. But yeah, the truth is that hard work actually does trump all. So I would say that there are three types of tests that you will face in your educational journey, right? There's the easy test, the average test, and there's the hard test. And the thing is, right, you'll never really get a 0 out of 10 difficulty test or a 10 out of 10 difficulty test. You'll never have it on the easy or the hard side of the spectrum. You'll actually have it more in the middle. And the reason why that is because like teachers want to have varying difficulty ranges. Now, in this case scenario, difficulty actually refers to the amount of room there is for error. So the leeway that you have in the test. So for example, easy tests have high amount of room for error. Average tests are average tests, and hard tests have little to no room for error, which means that in an easy test, you can like bomb it, and for some reason, just because you bombed it doesn't mean you necessarily did bad on the test. Versus a hard test is a test that theoretically, if you make a small little mistake, even if it's like one question, you still do really bad. So maybe that's like a 3-question quiz and you accidentally get one of those 3 questions wrong. Boom, 66%. Basically an automatic fail, right? My hypothesis as to why easy and hard tests exist is that the school system can use hard tests to identify students who are gifted, whereas using easy tests to identify students who are struggling in the subject. So for example, if you take a hard test, let's just say you're taking an AP class, AP Chem, and then all of a sudden, for this year specifically, this AP Chem test is really, really difficult. A lot of kids get more than half of the questions incorrect. But we have student A or student XYZ who is able to actually get a perfect score even though 90% of students get more than half the questions wrong. We know, or the schooling system knows as well, that student XYZ is particularly gifted because they were able to succeed even though the circumstances suggest that this test was difficult. So that's my hypothesis as to why the teachers can't just give you an average difficulty test every time. It's because they want to identify students that are either succeeding or struggling. And it also kind of helps plan the test for next year. And that's my hypothesis for teachers that actually change their test year to year, or maybe for College Board when they make the AP test, SAT, etc., right? So how is difficulty determined? I would say that difficulty is actually split into 3 categories: clear levers, student nuances, and randomness. And first, let's talk about clear levers. And I would say that this makes up about 60% of the difficulty of any given test. Clear levers are factors that are set by the administration in order to influence the difficulty of the test. Clear levers can include test curves. Now, a lot of the AP tests, pretty much all the AP tests, are heavily curved because AP tests in general are considered to be college level courses, college level exams. And in some cases, AP tests are actually harder than the actual college test because it's like advanced placement, right? You have to be more advanced in a subject in order to actually pass the AP test. And that's what I found. Low key, a lot of my college courses right now are actually easier than my high school courses. Then again, I did go to a kind of competitive high school, but I feel like that's beside the point. So test curves are one of the clear levers that the administration can control in order to determine the difficulty of a test. We'll talk about that later, right? Role distribution, multiple choice, free response are the most common two, but you will also see oral exams or other types of exams in the different roles that we play. But the two that I will focus on are the role of multiple choice and the role of free response. Most traditional tests, I would say even like a lot of the AP tests are structured that way. Multi-choice, free response, right? Use of technology. And I feel like the use of technology aspect actually matters a lot less than students think. Like, for example, if you're doing an AP Lang test online, yes, that does play a little bit of a role as to like how fast you can actually write your essay. But at the end of the day, if you suck at writing essays, it doesn't matter if you're going to write an essay on the computer if you still suck. Does that make sense? So the use of technology does matter, but it's a lot like less than you think it does. And then there's other factors such as open note tests or partner tests or any other crazy things that your teacher could throw in as a curveball. So let's talk about the clear levers. For example, we have test curves. Who actually benefits the most from the test curves? All students have prior memories that they can recall to at any given moment. The amount of prior memory that you can recall to, we'll just call it memory moment rating, MMR, right? This is very familiar to some of you, I know. Memory moment rating, MMR. And this attempts to quantify the ability of a student to be able to recall a topic when it is needed. So please note that MMR does not actually indicate a student's actual intelligence or knowledge level. It only quantifies their ability to recall the tested subject when necessary, because that's just the nature of tests. You can have a really smart student that just can't remember stuff, right? That's kind of like me. I would like to say that I have a little bit of difficulty with mastering like memorization. But if I do it enough times, even though I'm a quote unquote low MMR student, I'm still able to succeed. Because generally, low MMR students benefit from test curves. And I know that. I'm able to use that to my advantage, right? And then also, since I'm a low MMR student, right, I'm able to study things that I'm weak at and then kind of like half ignore things that I'm already good at. And that kind of balances it out. I'll talk more about that later. But yeah, the generally lower MMR students tend to benefit from these test curves because it makes the margin of error in a test easier. Quote unquote easier. So here we have a scenario. Scenario 1, we have a high MMR student, and this high MMR student takes an AP test with a multiple choice and a free response section, right? Pretty standard. And this student has probably an A level MMR, so they're an A student when it comes to multiple choice, and they're a B plus level student when it comes to the free response section, right? And then scenario 2, we have another student who's like a middle MMR student, and they take the exact same AP test with a multiple choice and a free response question, and they have a B minus level multiple choice MMR and an A minus free response MMR. And this AP test is curved very aggressively. These are ways that examiners can actually warp the difficulty of the test in order to make it more or less difficult. Because here's the thing, right? If student number 2 does fairly average on both of the sections, but the curve is very aggressive, it would actually make the result of student number 2 closer to student number 1. Whereas if the test wasn't curved as aggressively, student 2 and student 1 would actually have a large skill discrepancy in the actual results of the exam. So the second category that actually determines test difficulty is student nuance. So this is like the parts of the test that the examiner can't really control. So creating a test from an examiner's point of view is actually very limited. The things that the examiners can see are student scores, including previous years. So if you're a college board making an AP exam, you can look at the past and you can see, oh, this question seemed very difficult for students. Let's change it a little bit, right? So examiners have access to student scores and previous year's testing scores. They also have control and sight over the clear levers, so they control the curve. They control the distribution, whether or not the multiple choice or the free response is worth more on the test. So they control clear levers. They also control the distribution. So again, that's how many of each type of question there is. And what you need to remember is that there are certain things that examiners can't control. And for example, we have student A. Student A is attempting to take the AP Euro exam and have an A in AP Euro in high school, right? Hypothetically, since the student is an A-level student, they should do well on the AP exam on paper. But what if this kid's high school class only practiced multiple choice and ignored free response questions? And you know that the AP Euro test is divided half and half, right? The AP exam is made assuming that the student would go into the test with mastery of both sections. But this kid, like student A, on paper is an A-level student, really in reality becomes a B-level student when you factor in the fact that they haven't practiced the free response sections. And because of their inability to fulfill the role of free response questions, their A-level skill actually translates to a B-level result. And College Board can't account for the student's ability or what's taught by their high school teacher. I don't know if that makes sense, but student nuance, I feel like, is a really big part of how test taking actually goes. And continuing on this example, right? So we have the same student who has an A in AP Euro. Hypothetically, they should do well on their AP exam, but they haven't practiced free response. Assuming that student A is in a testing room with student B and student C. Student B and student C still have a decent grade in AP Euro. They have a B. Student A on paper is expected to do better than student B or C. But what if student B and student C prepare for the free response question on their own time and actually outperform student A? Even though student A had a higher quote-unquote MMR on paper out of the 3 students, it's very difficult for that to show because students B and student C actually have an advantageous position relative to student A. The way that clear levers actually play out have a very big impact on how a test plays out on the individual level. So if we go back to the testing scenario of student 1 and student 2 on the AP example with multiple choice and free response, student 1 has A- multiple choice MMR, but a B level free response MMR, whereas student 2 has a C+ multiple choice MMR and a B+ free response MMR. So on paper, student 2 actually should be significantly lower than student A in terms of the result that they should see on the test. However, this AP test is curved very aggressively, as well as has a difficult free response section. If the free response section is difficult on this AP exam, looking at the stats of both students, student 2 actually has a crazy advantageous position when compared to student 1. Does that make sense? The reason for that is because even though the free response is difficult, if the multiple choice questions are easy as well as curved aggressively, student 2 is allowed to make a lot more mistakes, whereas playing into their strength, which is free response. And student 1 is going to do well on multiple choice either way, but then maybe suffer a little bit on the free response section. So a lot of these, both of these examples show that the clear levers as well as the student nuances, like the variations from student to student, can actually play a very big role when testing. Because in this scenario specifically, right, I would say that student 2 actually gets a very big advantage when compared to student 1. Because after the curve, after the test is done, the skill discrepancy, which is supposed to be big, is actually brought a lot closer because of the fact that student 2 is stronger in multiple choice or stronger in free response, whereas student 1 isn't as strong in free response, but the test is curved aggressively. The last section that determines difficulty in a test is randomness. And randomness is an element that people actually have a hard time processing. It's like a hard pill to swallow, right? Randomness is an element that people have to realize actually exists. Outside noises and distractions can actually have a really big impact on the way a test plays out for an individual. Let me put this, in a visual for you guys. The curve is impacted if the smartest kid in the class gets sick and isn't able to make it to test day. That is just an element of randomness that a lot of people can't control, right? Getting sick. And if you just so happen to be the smart kid who's going to actually set the curve and you can't show up, well, guess what? The curve in general is skewed. It's not as it should be. Or another example is a student is taking an online AP Lang exam and their computer crashes, ending their test prematurely, right? That's an element of randomness. A computer crashing is not something you can necessarily control. And I'm using this example specifically because I know someone who this actually happened to, and they got a 2 on the AP Lang exam. They failed it, did not pass, because their computer crashed. That's an element of randomness that you just absolutely can't control, right? And the last one is you weren't able to sleep the night before your SAT, and now you're suffering from sleep deprivation. All these examiners cannot account for the randomness element that is going to happen in the everyday life. So that's why I put randomness as the smallest category, because hypothetically it shouldn't matter too much, but for purposes of this video, it does exist, right? So here's the example. We have 3 students. We have a straight A student, we have a B student, and we have a C student. On paper, the straight A student outperforms student 2 and student 3, right? But what if student 2 just broke up with their significant other? So they're not mentally in the game. They go into the testing room. They're like, oh, I'm sad. I'm heartbroken, right? Student 3 might actually have a chance to overtake student 2 because student 2 isn't in their clear head. Does that make sense? Now, let's do the example again, except let's make it a little more extreme. Let's just say student 1 shows up to the testing room drunk and sleep deprived, and student 3 ate a healthy breakfast and had a really good night's rest. Who's in the advantageous position here? Some might say still student A because they have the best on paper MMR. However, in my opinion, student 3 actually has a very big advantage in this situation because student 2 isn't in their right mind space, neither is student 1. So this is a little bit of the randomness element, because if you're in the perspective of student 3, you can't really control what the other 2 students do. But if you're like looking at it holistically, you're thinking, oh, how is this randomness? But remember, you're trying to see this from the point of view of one of the other students. That's where randomness comes into play. In conclusion, remember that whether a test is hard or difficult actually boils down to the margin of error that can actually occur on the test, right? It doesn't matter if you get half the questions wrong, if the curve is absolutely ginormous. And being able to perform well on your weaker topics is actually a superpower that makes it really easy to succeed come testing season, because it's not about what you can do right, but minimizing the amount of things that you do wrong. Minimizing the baseline of your performance actually strengthens a lot of your weaknesses. So let's just say you're like a good test taker, right? You have an A level multiple choice, but your free response is lacking. You're like a D level You're like a D level free response. If you can actually bring that up to, like, let's just say a B or a C on free response, your average is actually a lot stronger. I don't know how to explain that, but that's the best way I can. You just want to make your average as high as possible. Many people lose valuable time going down this rabbit hole of analyzing the testing and education system. And to be fair, it is addicting. I spent a lot of time researching this video, but realistically, it doesn't matter. We will all have hard and easy tests. And what we should take away is that hard work actually does trump all. So that's it for this video presentation. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that there was a lot of useful information in this, but this isn't like truth. It's not the Bible or anything. I don't want you guys to take this too seriously, because if you do take it too seriously, it will actually distract you from the learning that you're going to be doing, which is the most important part in my opinion. But yeah, these are just some testing nuances and sort of letting you guys know like the system and kind of how it plays out. But it's not meant to be taken as like gospel or anything. So yeah, thank you guys for listening, and I hope to see you guys soon. Peace out.